I'm Mike Johnson. I'm the director of Ascending Leaders, and we're about helping churches and disciples and leaders flourish. We do that through coaching, through teaching, and through resourcing. I teach seminary students, I teach pastors in groups like this, and I'm excited that you are interested in adult disciple making and being more effective at that. This is the fourth talk in a series of talks about effective adult disciple making, and this talk is about helping churches grow disciples based on group sizes. And let's start with Jesus. Jesus related to the disciples in different settings, in different size groups. He preached to multitudes without a microphone, without a sound system, 4,000 at one point. And then there were times when he was with many disciples, crowds, not multitudes, but maybe 60, 70. And then there were the 12 that he spent time with. And then in the 12, there was the 3, Peter, James, and John, who he spent some time with the 3 of them, the 4 of them together, the Mount of Transfiguration and other times. And then there are times when he was one-on-one with Peter and with John. He ministered to the disciples, and he grew the disciples in these different size groups. And look how that relates to the continuum of stages of the development of a disciple. Come and see. Jesus is saying to the multitudes, I am the Messiah, come and see. Come and believe. And when they believed in him, then it was come and follow me, and these were the many disciples. We know they're not just 12, but there were 60, 70, 80, 100. At one point he sent 72 out in twos. And then to come and be with me, those who traveled with him, that was the 12. And then the remain in me, when you get that kind of deep relationship, that's like having the 3 and the one-on-one, that's the really intense relationship. So there seems to be a correlation between the stages and also the sizes of groups that Jesus ministered to them in. Now that reminds me, in 1963, there was a sociologist by the name of Edward T. Hall. And maybe you've heard of this. He announced something he called proxemics. And he said that the physical distance between people affects their style of interpersonal communication. Hey, my friend, Brian Bannister is here. Hey, Brian, how you doing? Can you come up here? Good to see you.
Good to see you.
I'm glad you came out this afternoon. How's your wife doing? How's Becky doing?
She's doing very well.
Kids? Kids are doing well?
They're all doing well.
Good, good. And you? Work?
Yes.
Oh, great, good. Well, I'm really glad you're here. I'm glad. Hey, and there's Ted and Nancy Zylstra in the back row, other good friends. Do you know them?
I do know them.
Hi, Ted. Hi, Nancy. How are your kids? Well. They're doing well. Okay. Well, that's kind of like this proxemics, what it's about. He's saying that when we are close to each other, we talk to each other in ways, like maybe a subdued voice, maybe we'll go deeper into conversation, talk about our kids. And then we use a different voice over there, talking to someone that far out. So if I was talking to you and I said, hey, Brian, how you doing? You would, whoa, yes, that'd be way too much. Or if I would say to Ted and Nancy, hey, Ted and Nancy, how you doing back there? Good to see you. How the kids? Yeah, it doesn't really work well. So that's like this idea of proxemics. Will you help me kind of show the rest of this?
Gladly.
Okay. So this close to each other, he calls the intimate space. And we're going to use a tape measure here. And he says that's anything in between about 1.5 feet. So we're about 1.5 feet from each other. This and closer he calls the intimate space. So there's intimate conversations there. Then the next space he calls the personal space. And that is at about 4 feet. So from 1.5 feet to 4 feet, he calls that personal space. It's not intimate, but it's personal. So, good friends are going to be conversing in that space. That's the personal space. Then he has another one. And this one he calls the social space. And that goes all the way out to 12 feet. So let's go 4 to 12. We're at 13. Oh, a little too far. 12 feet right here. And so he says between 4 and 12 feet, that's a social space. And you interact with people differently there than you do in your personal space. The last one he gives us is the public space. And that's from 12 feet on to 25 feet, 23, 24, there we go, 25, won't go any further, and on. That's the public space, and we interact differently in the public space than we do in the social space or the personal space or the intimate space. Now, here, relate this as to how many people can be in that space. So once you come forward to 12 feet, where we just were, it's 18, 15, 13, 12. Right here is 12, all right? A little further back. 12 feet. So between 12 feet and 25 feet, that's the public space. If I was standing here, in that public space, we started 12 feet out, how many people could we get in there? Probably 70, 80, 90, 100, 200, 300, and so forth, right? That's large groups of people in the public space. Now, let's go to the next one, to the social space, and come in to 4 feet. So from 12 feet where you are to 4 feet. 5, 4. Whoop, a little too far. Oh, that's 8. No, you're right. I'm off. Here we go. 4 is right here. So from 4 to 12 feet, that's the social space. That is where maybe we could have in there anywhere from 20 people up to 65, 70. It'd be comfortable. Now, the next one is a personal space. And so come up to 1.5 feet. That's from that 4 feet down to 1.5 feet. And in that space, that's really intimate space. But that's like 5 to 15 people. Now, inside the 1.5 feet, how many people can we get here? Maybe 2 of us, 3 of us, 4 of us. So these different size social groups, there are different numbers of people that could be in each. Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me.
Okay. Hey, thanks for helping me out.
You bet.
So let's now take this to Jesus. Look at how that works. Jesus was with the multitudes, the large group. And then he was with the many disciples, 15 to 70-ish or a little bit more. And then he was with the 12, between 5 and 15. And then he had that intimate space when he was in groups with 3 others, or even one-on-one. Now, think about that. And think about that in a church setting. When Dave was helping me and we were doing that public space, and we were at the large group from the 12 feet to the 25 feet. Where was the 12 feet? It was the first pew, right? So the public space, we do that in the church. That's worship. And the kind of communication we have there is somebody usually talking, maybe preaching or praying or leading music. There's not a lot of talking back and forth. That's the public space. That's a large group. That's for celebration. Then there's a mid-sized group, and that's for mingling or for fellowship. That's 15 to 70 people, and it's a different context. There's different conversations going on in that. Or maybe it's still a teaching of one person to others, but people feel more free to talk to each other. And then there's a small group of 5 to 15. And the way we interact in there in the church is we're doing more discussing back and forth, and not maybe every person, or maybe every person contributes, some more than other, but it's a place where you're known by others. It would be kind of odd if you're in a small group in a couple of weeks and you meet somebody on the street who's in your small group and they say, yeah, you're in my small group, but I don't know your name. That really wouldn't work very well, would it? You're known in the small group. And then even a more intimate group is a place for casual sharing, for forthrightness. So each group provides the disciple with different types of interaction. Now, let's lay across that our friendships with Jesus, our 4 stages of the continuum. And there seems to be some connection here. When someone is a stranger to Jesus, some have talked about the fact that not always, but often people who are a stranger to Jesus, they may want to be anonymous. They may want to consider him. If they're considering him, they may want to come in to a crowd. They don't want anybody to ask them questions or anybody even to point them out or to delve too much into their life. And then as someone gets into that second stage of being a congenial friend of Jesus, they may be more comfortable in a medium-sized group, maybe sitting in a class of 20 or 30 people or something like that. They may not be ready for the small group yet. That's too intimidating. But they need more than is in the large worship for their growth as a disciple. And then as they grow through that second stage, they may become more comfortable and need more the small group where they can start to talk and they can start to relate to others. And in that time, they may move on to the close friends with Jesus and to the confidant with Jesus. And they're going to want the kind of discernment that comes in a group of 2 or 3 or 4 where there's a lot of time to interact. Now, this is not saying that when someone gets to the later stages, they wouldn't be coming to worship. No, they still can. But it's saying as far as spiritual growth as a disciple is concerned, the size of the group kind of loses its effectiveness as time goes on. Take for just one example of my own life. I really, Jesus became real to me in my teen years. And I still have the notebook that I would take to worship each time for church service, and I would take notes on the sermon. And I was growing by leaps and bounds at that time. Now today, I don't take notes in a sermon. Does it mean I don't grow? No, I do grow some, but I don't grow in leaps and bounds like some do, like I did back when I was in the early years. And see, sometimes in the church, people say, well, I'm here in a worship service, and that's going to help me grow, and it's not helping me grow like it used to. And the problem must be the sermon, but actually the problem may be the person. You've grown beyond that. You need more than the big public worship. You need the mid-sized group or the small group. So let's look at this. A church says, we want to do a better job of growing adult disciples. And the way we're going to do that here is we have got the large group for worship, and we've got the small groups for our disciple making. Now that's good, but not necessarily great. And why do you think that wouldn't be great? Because look at this. There's a whole group of people for whom they need more than they're getting in the large group worship, and yet they're not yet in small groups. And so you're basically saying, you're on your own, we're not going to disciple you, because we do it in these small groups. And there's a few of those people that if your church gives a strong emphasis on small groups, they'll be able to get them in there. They're close to it. But I've met them, I've talked to them, I know them. There are people who are afraid of the small group. They're not ready for that yet. They're intimidated by that. And sometimes we say, oh, they're just not very committed. Commitment isn't the issue for a lot of them. It is, they just aren't ready for that yet. They want to move forward, but that's just very scary. And then on the other end of the spectrum, if we only have small groups, what about those who really are at the point they need to go deeper? And if they're a small group of 12, they're meeting for an hour and a quarter, there really isn't much time for everybody to go really deep. And they need more 2 or 3 or 4, and then we're not providing that. So a better model is not simply to do disciple formation in small groups, but to have these mid-sized groups, events or large classes that help people bridge from the big worship and the growth as a disciple they get there and as they're growing towards the small groups. And then also to have these more intimate, caring groups that people can get into with some others. Some people call them triads or quads. Now, that's a good plan. So let's give you an example of how a church might do this. Let's say for worship, the large group, they do have a sermon series. And maybe it's a sermon series on a book. Actually, the church that we're having this talk in, they did one on the book, The Whole in the Gospel. And they had this sermon series. And then what they did is they had discussion questions for the small groups. Now, I'll tell you, I've seen churches who do this before. I've seen some churches who command all their small groups are going to do this, and that doesn't usually work very well. I think it works much better if we invite our small groups to do this, to use the same study as the sermon is. And so you're helping them take the sermon into the week by doing it in the small groups. But we've got people who aren't ready for small groups yet, so what do? Well, what if midweek there was a class, and maybe it was a pastor, maybe somebody else is going to say, we're going to take this message, and we're going to go further with it. So come here on Wednesday night. And there may be 30 people there. So somebody who wants more than that, who needs more than just that message, but is not ready for a small group, they've got something they can go to. But what about people who aren't even ready for that? I know one church, and what they did is they had like a ponder question, a really simple question that they would hand out. So if you were not yet ready for the mid-sized group, at least you had something to take home with you. Or they gave a verse a day for the week, just one verse that came out of the message to remind people of that message. And you even could have some smaller groups, some micro groups, some quads or triads, and give them some more deep questions that would help them to go even deeper with that sermon. You could have books for those who like to read books, just to help people grow on the same topic at the way that's best for their spiritual growth. That's just one way it can be done. Now, here's another part of this that really helps. Keep people moving by seeding each size group with the next size. Let me show you what we mean by that. So you've got the large group of worship. Get people comfortable by seeding that with an experience in a mid-sized group. And most churches do that. They call that the coffee hour, right? That's 20 to 60 people. It's not the same as a worship service, but people are interacting in a different way. It's tied to worship. Now, in a mid-sized group, have in it some small groups. At this church yesterday, there was a women's retreat, and I'm sure that was a mid-sized group, but I'm sure they broke down into small groups at a couple different places. So somebody who may not have been ready for a small group yet, they got a little taste of it, and might say, it's not so bad. That helps them grow on from there. What I've done with small groups is when we've been in a small group before, and we've taken maybe 45 minutes to discuss the topic, and then we get into these little triads. We split into groups of 3 or 4 to discuss the application questions. So within our small group, we're beginning to give people the experience of a more intimate, deeper group. So you're seeding each size group with the next one coming up, helping people continue to move rather than stay stuck. So I hope you're with me. I hope I haven't lost you yet on this. Let's give an example. And everybody, I think, likes spring lilies, so we're going to call her Lily. And Lily, she was getting frustrated with life, discouraged. She was far from Jesus. She was a stranger to Jesus. And one day, maybe it's a church like this church where we're having this talk, or another church, she, for some reason, comes to church. Her husband wouldn't come, and she says, forget him, I need something. She had maybe been to a church as a child, but she comes to a worship service, and she sits and she listens, and she doesn't make eye contact with anybody. She just doesn't want people to even know, to interact with her life. She doesn't want to have to talk about how bad it is. But something stuck. Something hit her. And she comes back again another time, and then another time, and then another time in this large group worship. And it seems like each message is crafted just for her needs. And a few people who are sitting around her begin to say hi to her and ask a few questions, and she just gives very short answers because she doesn't want to get to know anybody too much. And then she starts talking with someone a little bit more as she's coming, and there's this coffee hour she's noticed, and first she avoids it, and then she has coffee, and she's talking with someone in a mid-size group. And then she reads that church is going to have a 6-week women's ministry on a topic, and there's going to be a speaker on this topic on a Thursday night for the next 6 weeks. And one of the people in the coffee hour says, hey, are you going to go to that? You should go to that. I'm going. You should go to that. And it feels pretty scary to her, but she goes to that. And what she doesn't realize when she gets there, she sees there's 4 tables. There's about 8 to 10 people at each table, and she'll sit by some of the people she knows. And then there's a speaker, and then all of a sudden they go to some questions that you're to talk about around your table. Whoa, that's scary. But she doesn't have to say anything. And so it's a little bit uncomfortable, but she's there. And in that process, somewhere in there, she moves from becoming a stranger with Jesus to a friendship. She decides to give her life to Jesus. She decides to depend upon him, to have a lifelong relationship with him. And she becomes a congenial friend, a growing friend. And so after 6 weeks, this ministry ends. And her table says, you know what? Why don't we meet together for another 6 weeks as a small group? And she's gotten to know these ladies, and so it sounds pretty good. And so then she says, okay, I guess so. And so she meets with them. And she's growing in that small group. She's growing as a follower of Christ. And she's in the second stage, the stage where a lot of people get stuck. But she's in that small group. In fact, some things happen in her life where they don't make sense to her. Someone who's in the church, who doesn't know her well, in the store, treated her very rudely. And then she came on Sunday morning and saw that person. She said, how do I deal with that? Is that what Christianity is? And so her group helps her process that a little bit. And she continues to grow. And then her group says, well, you know what? We're going to do tonight, after meeting for a while, towards the end, they said, let's break down into 3 groups of 3, just to talk about the application question. Well, that's scary to her because that really is in your face. But she's trusted these women, and so Lily does it. And then in that process, she finds herself moving more towards Jesus being a part of her daily life. It says she's moving towards that 3rd stage. And then after that small group gets done, and the next season, their life stages are different, and they can't really get together well as a group, but their triads can. And so her triad says, hey, let's just keep meeting. And they keep meeting, and they meet for another 3 years as a triad. I've seen this happen in churches. And she then is being brought along. She's moving along from one size group to another. And she's not getting stuck. Now, there's times when we get stalled, but that's pulling her along. It doesn't work perfectly like that with everybody, but it can work like that, and it can be a way to help people grow as disciples. I've seen small groups that have triads in them, and the change is incredible. I lead Ascending Leaders, and we are now 10 years old. In our first 5 years, all our group material was set up so that small groups would break into triads, and we heard story after story after story of deep, significant life change, that stage 3 and 4 type of stuff. And then about 5 years ago, we kind of put our materials out to anybody, and we stopped really emphasizing the triads, and groups didn't have the triads, but just used us with no study ahead and just group time. In the last 5 years, we've had much less stories of life change. It does make a difference. So here's some points for you to remember. The number of feet we are from others affects our type of communication, and also the number of people in that space. And that's not important except for how it relates to disciple making. Because it seems that a size of a group, certain sizes, are best models, or best instruments for disciple making at various stages in the journey. This is like Jesus growing the disciples in various sizes of groups. You notice he doesn't pull the 3 aside way at the beginning. He's doing that at the end when they have a deep relationship. And when he's confronting them strongly, when they say, hey, can we have the better spot in heaven? That's at the end when they have a deeper relationship with him. Some churches attempt to do a better job at disciple making by saying, our small groups are going to do it, and that helps, but that's not the best. Because it's better if we can provide ways for people to grow at all the stages, different group sizes, not just small groups, but micro groups for those who are further along, or mid-sized groups. A stronger approach is to offer all 4 size groups to help people grow as a disciple, grow more deeply in love with Jesus at the kind of space and place that most helps them and is the most effective at that stage. Keep people growing as disciples by inviting people from worship into mid-sized groups. And in mid-sized groups, give them a short time of a small group experience. So help people, think about this, and let's help people keep growing. So those are 5 of the key points from today's talk. And now we have some questions that we'd like you to turn to someone next to you. I know you maybe not know everybody sitting next to you, and we're making you get into these micro groups right away, but we're just going to break that rule for this moment. And there's 3 questions here, and just choose one of them to talk about. Have you seen an example in your church of people being most comfortable growing spiritually in certain size groups? And talk about that. Or what mid-size groups, social size groups, 15 to 70, do you have in your church? Or how can your small groups better help people keep moving in their spiritual growth?